My name is Hannah Mitchell, and I'm 31 years old. The night my sister pointed her finger at me and screamed, "You ruined our lives," my parents believed her without question. It was a single moment that sliced my life into two distinct pieces, the time before and the long, silent time after. But before I tell you how everything flipped, how the silence I was forced into became the source of my greatest strength, like and subscribe and drop a comment to let me know where you're watching from. She screamed I ruined their lives. They believed her. I walked away. Now they won't stop calling. The night it all fell apart wasn't loud with thunder or rain. It was quiet. It was the suffocating quiet of a family diner after closing time, a place I knew better than my own bedroom. The air hung thick with the ghosts of the day's chaos, the lingering smells of fried onions, stale coffee, and the lemony scent of the cleaner I used to wipe down every single table. The only sounds were the low, tired hum of the big stainless steel refrigerator and the frantic buzz of a single fly bumping against the large front window, trying to get out. I was trying to get out too, not from the diner, but from the bone-deep exhaustion of a 60-hour week. My hands were still damp and wrinkled from the hot water of the dish pit. My back ached from leaning over the grill, and my mind was a fog of numbers from balancing the day's receipts. My sister Ashley stood under the harsh fluorescent lights of the main counter. They bleached the color from her face, making her look like a porcelain doll, pale, perfect, and fragile. Her eyes, usually sparkling with mischief, were wide and swimming with tears that looked expertly rehearsed. She raised a trembling hand, her perfectly manicured finger aimed at my chest like a weapon. "You ruined our lives!" she screamed. The sound wasn't just loud, it was sharp and jagged, tearing through the quiet diner and echoing off the cold linoleum floors. It seemed to vibrate in my own bones. I froze, a damp rag still clutched in my hand. My entire world seemed to tilt. This had to be a joke, another one of Ashley's dramatic episodes. I looked to my parents, my anchors, my foundation. I waited for my dad to let out his booming laugh and tell Ashley to knock it off. I waited for my mom to step forward and wrap an arm around her, cooing, Now, what's all this about?" I waited for the simple, basic trust that a child is supposed to be able to take for granted from a parent. It never came. I watched their faces as if in slow motion. My father, Robert, a man whose hands were calloused from work and whose temper was notoriously short, had his jaw clenched so tight a muscle jumped near his ear. His face, usually ruddy from the heat of the kitchen, deepened to a dark, blotchy red. My mother, Elaine, a woman who believed appearances were everything, pressed her lips together into a thin, white, unforgiving line. Her eyes, which could be so warm when she was praising Ashley, were now like chips of flint. They didn't look at Ashley, the source of the scream. They looked straight through me. They weren't seeing their daughter, Hannah, the one who worked tirelessly by their side. They were seeing a stranger, a culprit. The accusation hung in the air between us, and in the space of 3 heartbeats they chose to believe it. My father's words were not yelled, they were spat, each one a venomous dart. All this time, under our own roof, my mother simply nodded, her silence a hammer blow, confirming his verdict. I didn't fight, I didn't scream back. What was the point? In their eyes, I was already tried and convicted. The words I needed, "How could you believe this? Don't you know me at all?" were trapped in my throat, choked by a sudden, profound sense of loss. So I said nothing. I dropped the rag on the counter, turned my back on the only life I'd ever known, and walked toward the door. The little silver bell attached to it tinkled softly, a sound that had always meant a customer was arriving. That night, it was the soundtrack to my departure. It was a sad, tinny goodbye. I left in silence. Now, 5 years later, their phone calls are the loudest noise in my life. Growing up in our small Texas town was like living in a fishbowl. Everyone knew everyone's business, every success was community property, and every failure was a headline in the town's unwritten newspaper of gossip. Our family, the Mitchells, were a local institution, mostly because of Mitchell's Place, the diner my parents poured their blood, sweat, and savings into. And at the center of that institution was a single, sacred principle my parents preached like gospel: family loyalty. "Family is all you've got in this world," my father would say over Sunday dinner. You stand by your family no matter what. It was a beautiful idea, but I learned early on that their version of the rule had a hidden clause. Family loyalty really meant protecting my younger sister Ashley at all costs. The cost, almost every time, was my truth, my feelings, my peace of mind. Ashley was the sun, and I was just a minor planet caught in her gravitational pull, tasked with reflecting her light. She was 3 years younger, but in our family hierarchy, she was leagues above me. She was the perfect one, the beautiful one, the one who was deserving of better. Her laughter was celebrated. Her tears were a five-alarm fire that required all hands on deck. My accomplishments, on the other hand, were treated like footnotes in her much more interesting story. This wasn't a one-time thing. It was the quiet, constant wallpaper of my childhood. I can still feel the sting of it in sharp, specific memories. I was in 8th grade, a shy, bookish kid who found comfort in the clear, right and wrong answers of mathematics. I worked for weeks on a project for the state science fair, a detailed analysis of local water quality. I won first place. I remember carrying the big blue ribbon and the certificate home, my chest so tight with pride I felt like I could float. I burst through the door and announced my news. My dad looked up from his newspaper. "Good job, Hannah," he grunted, his eyes already returning to the sports page. "Don't let it get to your head." My mom was on the phone. She gave me a thumbs up and mouthed, "That's nice, honey." She taped the ribbon to the fridge, but it was half hidden behind a pizza coupon and the grocery list. A week later, Ashley, who was in 5th grade, brought home a charcoal drawing of a horse she'd done in art class. It was a decent drawing. The horse had 5 legs, but the shading was nice. My mother acted as if she'd just discovered a lost Da Vinci. "Oh, Robert, come look at this. Isn't she just a true artist?" she gushed. That weekend, she took the drawing to the craft store and had it professionally framed. It still hangs in their living room, right above the television. My blue ribbon was thrown out a month later with old bills. The worst part wasn't the lack of praise. It was the assignment of blame. It was a fixed equation in our house. If something went wrong, I was the variable that had to be solved. When I was 16 and Ashley was 13, she broke our grandmother's antique porcelain vase, the one she'd brought over from the old country. It was the only truly valuable thing my parents owned. Ashley had been trying to practice a cheerleading move in the living room, a place we were both forbidden from roughhousing. I was in the kitchen, doing my homework. I heard the crash. I ran in to find Ashley standing over the shattered pieces, her face white with shock. The moment she saw me, her expression changed. She crumpled to the floor and started wailing. When my parents rushed in, she pointed at me through her tears. "Hannah startled me," she cried. "I told her not to sneak up on me, and she did, and I got scared and dropped it." It was a blatant, ridiculous lie. But they bought it without a moment's hesitation. My protests were dismissed as me trying to get out of trouble. My punishment was being grounded for a month and having to work extra shifts at the diner to pay for a replacement, a cheap imitation that fooled no one. That night, when I was sitting in my room, my mom came in. She didn't apologize. She sat on the edge of my bed and gave me the speech I'd heard 1,000 times. "Look, Hannah," she said softly, her voice laced with weary disappointment. "I know you're upset, but your sister is sensitive. She didn't mean for it to happen. You need to be the bigger sister. You need to set the example." Being the bigger sister, it was a life sentence. It meant apologizing for things I didn't do. It meant swallowing my anger when Ashley borrowed my favorite clothes and returned them stained or torn. It meant cleaning up her messes, both literal and figurative. It meant being the responsible one so she could be the free-spirited one. It meant being the anchor, heavy and unseen at the bottom, so she could be the beautiful white sail, catching all the wind. I never realized that an anchor doesn't get to go anywhere. It just gets left behind. The diner was my parents' American dream and increasingly my personal nightmare. After I finished my 2-year bookkeeping degree at the community college, I came home. I told everyone, including myself, that it was to help them. They were struggling, the margins getting thinner every year, and they couldn't afford the accountant they desperately needed. But the truth was darker, sadder. Deep down, I was still that 13-year-old girl with the blue ribbon, pathetically hoping that if I just did enough, worked hard enough, sacrificed enough, they would finally see me. Not as Ashley's responsible older sister, but as Hannah. So I worked. I buried myself in that diner. My day started at dawn, my hands smelling of raw onions and bacon grease as I helped my dad with the morning prep. I'd tie on an apron and wait tables through the chaotic lunch rush, my feet throbbing and my smile plastered on. I stayed late, long after the last customer had left, mopping the sticky floors and scrubbing the grill until it shone. Then, and only then, would I sit in a deserted booth, the red vinyl cracked beneath me, and spread out the day's receipts. Under the dim glow of a single overhead light, I would fight with the numbers, trying to stretch every dollar to make sense of the senseless. I was pulling 60, sometimes 70-hour weeks. My body felt like a machine running on fumes. Ashley, of course, also worked there. She was the hostess, a job that mostly required her to look pretty and smile. She'd float in around 11, never on time, dressed in a cute outfit that was completely impractical for a restaurant. She'd flash a dazzling smile at the customers, lean against the counter, texting on her phone, and disappear for long, frequent breaks. Her excuses were a rotating cast of minor ailments and social emergencies. I have a brutal headache. My friend Becky is having a total meltdown about her boyfriend. My parents would just nod and wave her on. Of course, sweetheart, go take care of yourself. I started noticing the discrepancies in the cash drawer almost immediately. It was small at first. A $20 bill gone here, a 50 missing there. I knew it was her. I saw the way her eyes darted to the till when she thought no one was looking. I cornered her one afternoon in the dry storage room, surrounded by giant cans of tomatoes and sacks of flour. Ashley, the drawer was short again yesterday. You can't just take cash, I said, trying to keep my voice even and non-accusatory. She didn't even have the grace to look guilty. She rolled her eyes, a perfect, practiced motion of teenage disdain she'd never outgrown. Oh, relax, Hannah. It's an advance on my paycheck. I'll pay it back. Don't be so dramatic. She never paid it back. And I, like the fool I was, let it go. I told myself it wasn't worth the fight. I would just work an extra shift to cover it, pick up a few extra tables. I was being the bigger sister, again. But the small amounts grew. Ashley was living a life that a part-time hostess salary could never fund. She'd show up with a new designer handbag, talking casually about a weekend trip to a boutique hotel in Austin. I was too tired, too buried in receipts and inventory sheets, to connect the dots in a way that made sense. I just kept my head down, working harder, as if my sheer effort could plug the holes in our sinking ship. The reckoning came on a Tuesday night in October. The air was turning crisp outside, but inside the diner, the atmosphere was thick with tension. My dad was hunched over the quarterly profit and loss statement I'd just prepared. His brow was furrowed, his finger tracing a line of numbers. "This can't be right," he said, his voice a low, dangerous growl. He looked up at me, his eyes narrowed. "It says we're down nearly $10,000. 10,000! Where in the hell did the money go, Hannah?" My heart hammered against my ribs. I knew. In that sickening, plunging instant, I knew. It wasn't 100 small loans, it was one giant theft. My eyes shot to Ashley, who was sitting at the counter, painting her nails a violent shade of pink. She saw the panic on my face, and a flicker of fear crossed her own. But it was gone in a second, replaced by something cold, sharp, and calculating. She was already building her defense. "Hannah, you're the one who does the books," my mother said, her voice edged with an accusation that was already familiar. "You handle the accounts. You tell us what happened." I opened my mouth. I was going to tell them. I was going to lay out the small thefts, the missing 20s and 50s, my suspicions. I was going to suggest we all sit down and talk about it, figure it out as a family. But Ashley was faster. She was always faster. She let out a sob, a theatrical, gut-wrenching sound that filled the entire diner. She knocked over the bottle of nail polish, and the pink liquid bled across the counter like a wound. And then she unleashed the lie, the one she must have been polishing in her mind for weeks. "It's Hannah!" she screamed, the words tearing from her throat. "I didn't want to say anything. I saw her. She's been taking money for months. She said she hated it here, that you two were slave drivers and didn't appreciate her. She ruined everything. She's the reason we're broke." The silence that followed was absolute. It was a vacuum that sucked all the air out of my lungs. I stood there, mouth agape, the words of my own defense turning to dust on my tongue. It was such a monstrous, perfectly crafted lie, aimed at all my secret resentments and frustrations, twisting them into a motive for a crime. I stared at my parents, my heart screaming at them, please, not this. You know me, you know who I am. Don't believe this. My mother looked from my stunned face to Ashley's crumpled, sobbing form, and I saw the decision happen in her eyes. She chose the daughter who was loud and broken over the one who was quiet and strong. She chose the easier story. My father's fist came down on the formica counter with a deafening crack. The salt and pepper shakers jumped, one of them falling to the floor and shattering. The sound jolted me. "Get out!" he roared, his face just inches from mine. I could see the broken blood vessels in his eyes. His breath smelled like stale coffee, and a lifetime of disappointment he had now decided to lay at my feet. "You have destroyed this family. I don't ever want to see your face in this diner again. Get out." He didn't ask for proof. He didn't ask a single question. He just believed her. In that instant, all my sacrifices, the 60-hour weeks, the missed parties, the late nights hunched over ledgers, they didn't just turn to ash. It was as if they had never existed at all. I finally closed my mouth. I looked at my sister, who was now being cradled in my mother's arms. Over my mom's shoulder, Ashley's eyes met mine. They were red from crying, but deep inside them, I saw it. A flicker of cold, hard triumph. She had won. That was the end. I didn't say a word. I turned, walked past the booths I had scrubbed 1,000 times, and pushed open the front door. The little bell tinkled. I stepped out into the cool, indifferent night and never once looked back. The lie Ashley told that night didn't stay within the four walls of the diner. It grew legs and a voice of its own, and it ran all over our small town. A small town is like a tinderbox. One spark of gossip can set the whole place on fire, and my reputation was the kindling. Ashley, basking in the glow of my parents' sympathy, fanned the flames. She became the star of her own tragic play, a story she told with heartbreaking sincerity to anyone who would listen. I was the villain, a cold, calculating, jealous sister. She told our cousins that I had a secret gambling problem, that I owed dangerous people money. She told our neighbors that I couldn't stand to see her happy with her boyfriend Mark, and that I had stolen the money to try and ruin her life out of pure bitterness. She twisted my quiet, hard-working nature into something sinister. She was always so resentful, she'd say, shaking her head sadly. I guess it finally just boiled over. My parents, lost in their own grief and sense of betrayal, became her unwitting accomplices. They didn't stand on a street corner and shout accusations. They did something far more effective and far more damaging. They spread whispers. At the grocery store, my mom would run into a friend and sigh heavily, her face a mask of sorrow. "We're just having such a hard time," she'd say. "Our eldest daughter, she betrayed us in the worst way." At the diner, my dad would sit with the morning regulars, his face grim, and just shake his head when they asked how he was doing. He let their imaginations fill in the blanks, which they did with relish. The story solidified. I was no longer Hannah Mitchell, the quiet girl who was good at math. I was the Mitchell girl who stole from her own family. The social fallout was swift and brutal. My boyfriend Mark was the first casualty. We had been together for 2 years, and I had thought we were in love. His family were regulars at the diner, and they adored my parents. At first, Mark stood by me. "There's no way you did this, Hannah," he insisted the day after it happened. "I know you." But the town's poison began to seep in. His parents sat him down and told him to stay away from me, that I was damaged goods, that I came from a family with serious problems. I saw the doubt start to cloud his eyes. Our phone calls became shorter, his answers more clipped. A week later, he asked to meet me at the park, at the old, rusty swing set where we'd had our first kiss. He couldn't look me in the eye. "My mom talked to your dad this morning," he mumbled, kicking at a loose patch of dirt. She said your father told her you admitted to it and ran off." "That's a lie, Mark," I cried, my voice cracking. "He's lying. Why are you listening to them instead of me?" "Because it's your own family, Hannah," he finally burst out, his face a mess of confusion and frustration. "Why would they lie about something like this? It just doesn't make sense." In that one question, I knew it was over. He chose the story that was easier to believe. He broke things off right there. I felt like I was watching myself from a great distance as he walked away, leaving me alone on the swing set. The cold shoulder I got from the rest of the town was just as painful. At church, a place that was supposed to offer comfort and grace, people who had known me since I was a baby would suddenly find something fascinating to look at on the ceiling when I walked past. The pastor's wife, a woman with a perpetually pious smile, pulled me aside one Sunday after the service. "Hannah, dear," she said, patting my arm in a way that was meant to be comforting but felt deeply condescending. "We are all sinners. The first step toward healing is to confess your sins and pray for forgiveness." "Forgiveness for what?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. She just gave me a sad, pitying smile. "God knows, dear, and so do you. I was an outcast. My family was gone, my partner was gone, my friends were gone. The town I had called home my entire life now felt like a prison yard, where every person I passed was a juror who had already declared me guilty. The isolation was a physical presence, a heavy cloak I couldn't take off. All I had left was myself, my own quiet, wounded, but somehow still beating heart. The final crushing blow, the one that shattered the last fragile pieces of my spirit, came 2 months later, at my grandmother's 70th birthday party. I fought with myself for days about whether to go. The thought of walking into a room full of relatives who looked at me with either pity or contempt made me physically ill. But this was my grandmother. She was the one person in the family who had always seemed to see me, who praised my good grades and told me I had a sensible head on my shoulders. I couldn't miss it. I held on to a sliver of hope, a foolish, desperate belief that outside the toxic environment of the diner, things might be different, that they might see me as family again. I was wrong, so terribly wrong. The party was at my Aunt Carol's house. Her backyard was filled with folding tables, mismatched chairs, and the thick, smoky smell of barbecue. The moment I walked through the side gate, the cheerful chatter faltered. It didn't stop completely, but it dipped, like a stone had been dropped into a pond. I felt the ripple of my arrival. 100 pairs of eyes flickered toward me before quickly looking away. I saw my parents standing by the grill with my dad's brother, Uncle Stan. My mother saw me, and her face, which had been smiling, instantly hardened into a disapproving mask. She turned her back to me, a deliberate, public shunning. I tried to pretend I didn't notice. I pasted a smile on my face, found my grandmother sitting in a lawn chair, and gave her a hug and her gift. She squeezed my hand and whispered, "I'm glad you came, dear." And for a moment I could breathe again. I tried to make small talk with a cousin, but the conversation was stilted and awkward. He kept glancing over my shoulder, as if looking for an escape. I should have known Ashley wouldn't allow me even that small measure of peace. She couldn't stand me being there, occupying space in her story. She needed to remain the center of the tragedy. She needed to be the victim. Her timing was impeccable. She waited until my aunt brought out the big sheet cake, candles blazing. Everyone gathered on the patio, their voices rising in a slightly off-key rendition of Happy Birthday. As the last note faded and my grandmother prepared to blow out the candles, Ashley burst into tears. It was a masterful performance, filled with heaving shoulders and gasping breaths. "I can't do this!" she wailed, her voice catching dramatically. She pointed at me, her finger trembling once again. "I can't stand here and pretend everything is okay when she is here. How could she even show her face? She's poison. She is the one who ruined our lives." The backyard went dead silent. You could hear the cicadas buzzing in the trees. My grandmother looked utterly bewildered. My aunts and uncles exchanged uncomfortable sideways glances. Everyone was looking at me, waiting for my reaction. I just stood there, my hands hanging empty at my sides, my heart feeling like a block of cement in my chest. My eyes found my parents, a silent, desperate plea. "Do something. Say something. Stop this." My father took a step forward, and for one wild, hopeful second, I thought he was going to come to my defense, to tell Ashley she was out of line. Instead, he shook his head and muttered, just loud enough for everyone around him to hear, "Here we go. The drama queen strikes again." But he wasn't looking at Ashley. He was looking at me. In his twisted reality, I was the source of the drama, simply by existing. Then my mother was in front of me. Her face was a mask of weary frustration, as if my presence was an intolerable burden. She didn't hug me. She didn't even speak to me like a human being. She grabbed my upper arm, her nails digging into my skin like tiny claws. Hannah, for once in your life, can you just stop playing the victim? She hissed, her voice a low, venomous whisper meant only for me. You have done enough damage. Just go. Humiliated, crushed, betrayed. The words are inadequate. It was a feeling beyond language. It was the feeling of your own soul being scooped out with a spoon. My own mother accusing me of playing the victim, while my sister was putting on a Broadway-worthy show of fake tears just 10 feet away. I pulled my arm from her grasp. I didn't say a word. There was nothing left to say. They had made their choice, and they had made it in front of everyone. I turned and walked away. I walked through the silent, staring crowd of my own relatives, out the side gate, and down the quiet suburban street to where my beat-up old car was parked. I got in, shut the door, and the world outside went silent. I didn't start the engine. I just sat there in the gathering dusk, the streetlights flickering on one by one, casting long, lonely shadows on the dashboard. And for the first time since this whole nightmare began, I cried. It wasn't a few quiet tears. It was a storm. I cried until my chest heaved and my throat felt like it had been scraped with sandpaper. I cried for the little girl who just wanted her dad to be proud of her science fair ribbon. I cried for the young woman who had worked herself to the bone for a family that threw her away like a piece of trash. I cried because, in that moment, sitting alone in my car, I felt like an orphan. My family was alive, but they were dead to me, and I was dead to them. That night in my car was the absolute bottom. There was no floor beneath it. And when you hit that point, when you realize you have nothing left to lose, something strange and unexpected happens. The fear evaporates. The desperation drains away. All that's left is a strange, hollow, and ice-cold clarity. I saw it all so clearly then. I had been waiting for them to come to their senses, for Ashley to confess, for an apology that would never come. I had been begging, with my sad eyes and my wounded silence, for them to love me again. It was a pathetic waste of my life. Sitting there with salty tear tracks drying on my face, a quiet decision formed in the wreckage of my heart. It wasn't a loud, angry vow of revenge. It was a whisper, a tiny spark in the suffocating darkness. I'm done. Done waiting. Done hoping. Done trying to earn a love that should have been unconditional. I would walk away, and I would not look back. I would rebuild my life from nothing, piece by painful piece, and I would never, ever again give them the satisfaction of watching me break. My victory wouldn't be in proving my innocence to them. My victory would be in living a good life, a life they had no part in. The next morning, I packed a single, shabby suitcase with the few things that mattered. I had $374 in a savings account. It was everything I had in the world. I got in my car, pointed it north on I-35, and drove. I didn't have a destination, only a direction, away. I ended up in Dallas. It was huge, overwhelming, and blessedly anonymous. No one knew my name. No one knew the stories they told about me back home. I was a blank slate. The first year was the hardest of my life. I rented a tiny, depressing room in a shared apartment with 3 other girls. The room was barely big enough for a bed, and the window looked out onto a brick wall. I found a low-paying data entry job at a large accounting firm, a mind-numbing task of typing numbers into spreadsheets for 8 hours a day. The work was dull, but it was a start. The nights were the worst. The loneliness of a big city is a special kind of hell. I'd lie in my narrow bed and listen to the sounds of traffic and sirens, feeling like the only person on the planet. The ghosts of my old life were constant companions. I missed the smell of the diner in the morning. I even missed my dad's grumpy jokes. One night, feeling particularly broken, I picked up my phone, my thumb hovering over my mother's number. I just wanted to hear her voice. But then, as clearly as if she were standing in the room, I heard her hiss, "Stop playing the victim." My thumb moved from her contact to the power button and I turned the phone off. I wasn't a victim. I was a survivor. I was a builder. That moment was a turning point. I poured all the energy I had once wasted on my family into myself. While my coworkers went out for happy hour, I went home to my tiny room and studied. I enrolled in night classes to get the certifications I needed to become a real accountant. I was fueled by coffee and a cold, burning determination. Silence was my greatest weapon. I changed my number. I deleted my social media. I effectively vanished. I knew they wouldn't come looking for me. In their version of the story, the guilty daughter had run away to escape her shame. It was a neat and tidy ending for them, and it was the clean break I needed to start again. I saved every dollar I could. My diet consisted of ramen noodles, peanut butter sandwiches, and cheap coffee. I bought my clothes at thrift stores. I was building an arsenal, not of weapons, but of independence. Every dollar in my savings account, every past exam, every quiet night I survived without breaking down. They were all bricks in the wall I was building around my new life. A wall they would never be able to breach. 5 years is a long time. It's long enough for deep wounds to scar over, for bitter memories to lose their sharp edges. It's long enough to forget the sound of your father's yelling and the sting of your mother's disappointment. It's long enough to build an entirely new life. And I did. I passed my CPA exams on the first try, scoring in the top 10% in the state. The partners at the firm where I'd started as a data entry clerk had noticed me. They saw a quiet, intensely focused young woman who didn't gossip, didn't complain, and whose work was flawless. I got my first promotion. A year later, I got another, managing a small team. I was good at my job. I had a knack for finding the story in the numbers, for seeing the patterns others missed. 5 years after walking into that Dallas office as a nobody with a broken heart, I was made a junior partner. I had my own corner office with a window that overlooked the city skyline. I had my own clients, my own team, and a salary that the girl from the small-town diner could never have imagined. One afternoon, I was browsing commercial real estate listings online, a sort of fantasy game I like to play. And then I saw it. A foreclosed property in a small, artsy neighborhood on the outskirts of the city. It was a derelict, forgotten old building with boarded-up windows and peeling paint, a place most people would drive by without a second glance. It reminded me of something. Years ago, I'd been in the car with Ashley and her then-husband. They had pointed at a similar rundown building and laughed. "Look at that trash," Ashley had sneered. "Who would ever want a dump like that?" A slow smile spread across my face. I would. I bought it. I poured a significant portion of my savings into it, a risk that made my stomach flutter with both fear and excitement. I spent every weekend there, covered in dust and sweat, working alongside contractors and designers. We ripped out the old, rotting floors and put in warm, reclaimed hardwood. We tore down interior walls, opening up the space and letting the light flood in through huge new windows. Slowly, painstakingly, the trash was transformed. 6 months later, the Daily Grind opened its doors. It wasn't just another coffee shop. It was a coffee and bakery hub, a warm, welcoming space filled with comfortable armchairs, local art, and the intoxicating smell of fresh coffee and baking bread. I used my grandmother's old handwritten recipes for cinnamon rolls and pecan pie, recipes my mother had never bothered to learn. The place became a phenomenal success. The neighborhood embraced it as its own. Food bloggers wrote glowing reviews. People started driving from all over the city for our pastries and our perfectly brewed coffee. It was my quiet revenge, a revenge built not of spite, but of creation. I had taken something they would have dismissed as worthless and turned it into something beautiful, thriving, and beloved. I had built my own community, my own home. Word eventually travels, even from a big city to a small town. A distant cousin who lived in a Dallas suburb stumbled into the coffee shop one day, not realizing it was mine. Her jaw literally dropped when she saw me behind the counter laughing with a customer. I knew with absolute certainty that the news would reach my family. I could picture their faces, the shock, the confusion, the disbelief. In their story, I was supposed to be struggling, broken, paying for my sins. I was the family failure, the cautionary tale. Instead, I had quietly built a life of independence and respect that was far beyond their reach. I was no longer the girl who ran away. I was the woman who had gotten away. Poetic justice isn't like lightning. It doesn't strike in a dramatic, fiery flash. It's more like water erosion, a slow, quiet, inevitable process. While I was patiently building my life up, brick by brick, my sister was recklessly tearing hers down, one bad decision at a time. Ashley's lavish spending, the very habit that had started this whole mess, never stopped. The $10,000 she stole from the diner was just a down payment on a lifestyle funded by credit cards, short-term loans, and her husband's dwindling patience. Her husband, who came from a moderately well-off family, finally reached his limit. He got tired of the constant calls from debt collectors, the lies, the drama, and the bottomless pit of her entitlement. He filed for divorce, took a job in another state, and left her. Suddenly, Ashley, the perfect daughter who was deserving of better, was 30 years old with 2 young children she couldn't support, a mountain of debt, and no real-world skills. So she did the only thing she knew how to do. She ran home to Mommy and Daddy. But the home she ran back to was a sinking ship. The diner, which had been barely afloat even with my meticulous bookkeeping, was now drowning. My father, a good cook but a terrible businessman, had let things slide into chaos. My mother, overwhelmed by a resentful, demanding Ashley and 2 small, energetic grandchildren, was at her breaking point. The business was hemorrhaging money and the bank was threatening foreclosure. They were losing everything. And that's when my phone, silent for 5 long years, began to ring. The first call was from my mother. It was an unknown number, so I answered it. Her voice was cold, clipped, and filled with an unnerving sense of entitlement. "Hannah, it's your mother, we need to talk." There was no apology, no kindness, no "how are you," just a demand. I felt a cold knot form in my stomach. I said nothing and pressed the end call button. Then came the voicemails. They became a regular feature of my days. At first, they were clipped and demanding. Then, over the weeks, they began to melt into a puddle of desperation. "Hannah, it's your father. Your mother and I. Well, things are tough here. Ashley's back home with the kids. You should call. Hannah, it's Mom again. The diner isn't doing well. We really could use your help with the books just for a little while. It's the least you could do." "It's your father. Look, I'm not going to beg, but we need you. Please help us. Ashley needs you. Your nieces. They need you." I would listen to them in my quiet office, watching the city lights twinkle below. I felt a strange sense of detachment, as if I were watching a movie about someone else's family. The one that finally broke through my wall of silence came late one night. It was my father. His voice was no longer gruff or demanding. It was thin, reedy, and thick with a desperation I had never heard before. It was the voice of a defeated man. "Hannah, please," he rasped, his voice cracking. "We can't lose the diner. It's all we have. It's your grandfather's legacy. Please don't let this happen to your family." Your family. The irony was so thick I could have choked on it. The family that had disowned me, that had called me a thief and a traitor, was now claiming me again because they were desperate. The people who had spat "you ruined us" were now begging me to save them. For the first time in 5 years, I got in my car and drove south, back toward the town that had tried to destroy me. I walked into the diner on a Sunday afternoon. It was closed, the "sorry we're closed" sign hanging crookedly in the window. The door was unlocked. The place looked more than just tired. It looked defeated. The red vinyl on the booth seats was deeply cracked, with yellowing foam peeking through. A fine layer of greasy dust coated the tops of the napkin dispensers. The air, once vibrant with life, was heavy with the smell of old grease and decay. They were all there, huddled in the corner booth like survivors of a shipwreck. My father, who had always seemed larger than life, looked shrunken, his shoulders slumped. My mother's face was a roadmap of worry lines, and Ashley. She was staring down at the sticky tabletop, her hair unkempt, the youthful sparkle completely gone from her eyes. Their heads snapped up when they heard the bell tinkle. A wave of pathetic, desperate relief washed over their faces. They thought their savior had arrived, that I had come to wave a magic wand and make it all better. My father started talking before I even reached the table, his words tumbling out in a nervous rush. He told me about the debt, the threatening letters from the bank, the imminent foreclosure. My mother chimed in, her voice trembling, talking about Ashley's 2 little girls, how they needed stability, how they couldn't lose their home, which was the apartment above the diner. They pleaded, they begged. They offered me my old job back, my old room back. They talked about family and loyalty and second chances. They offered me everything except the one thing that mattered. Not once did the words, "we were wrong," cross their lips. Not once did I hear the simple phrase, "we are so sorry, Hannah." I listened patiently, letting them exhaust their arguments. I stood by the table, my purse clutched in my hand. I wasn't angry anymore. The anger had burned itself out years ago, leaving behind a calm, cool, and unshakable strength. When they finally fell silent, the only sound was the hum of the refrigerator. I looked at them, my family, and for the first time, I saw them clearly. Not as the monsters who had ruined my life, but as weak, frightened people who had made a terrible choice and were now drowning in the consequences. I heard everything you said, I began, my voice clear and steady. It didn't shake. It was the voice of a woman who knew her own worth. And now you are going to listen to me. I will not be your scapegoat again. I will not be the one you blame when things go wrong, and I will not be the person you call to fix your mistakes. That part of my life is over. I paused, letting the words sink in. I forgive you. I forgive you for not believing me, for throwing me away, for breaking my heart into a million pieces. I forgive you because the anger was a poison, and I chose to stop drinking it a long time ago. It's for my own peace, not for your comfort. But forgiveness and trust are two very different things. I will never belong to this house of lies again. I reached into my purse and pulled out a cashier's check. It wasn't written to Robert and Elaine Mitchell. It was made out to the town's elementary school. This is a donation to the school's discretionary fund, I said, sliding it across the table. I've spoken to the principal. It's enough to cover all of Ashley's children's school expenses for the next 3 years. Their lunches, their supplies, their field trip fees, new coats for the winter. They are innocent in all of this, and they will not suffer because of the choices that the adults in their lives have made. Ashley finally looked up, her eyes wide with a confusion that was almost comical. My parents stared at the check, then back at me. This wasn't the deal they wanted. This wasn't the bailout they were expecting. This was something else entirely, something they couldn't comprehend. I stood up straight, my back no longer aching from the weight of their expectations. The diner will fail, I said, not with malice, but with the simple finality of a fact. You will lose this place, and you will have to face that on your own. Then I turned and walked away. The little silver bell above the door tinkled one last time. This time, it didn't sound sad or final. It sounded like the beginning. It sounded like freedom. As I drove back to Dallas, back to my thriving business, my quiet apartment, and my peaceful life, I didn't feel triumph or the satisfaction of revenge. I just felt light. I had chosen peace. I had protected the innocent. And I had refused to re-enter the cycle of blame and rescue. I left them to face the consequences of their own story, and I drove on, free to continue writing mine. Have you ever been blamed for something you didn't do, while the real guilty one got away with it? Share your story in the comments. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and join this channel for more stories of betrayal, survival, and quiet strength.